Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Dr. Larry Burchett. You like my intro, Steve? This is Father Steve Newton. You're my favorite priest of all time. You were a rector at Notre Dame in Soren Hall for
11.
quite a span in there. And in the middle of this Corona stuff, I thought it would be, I wanted to get your perspective, from the pulpit, just to see what you're preaching about, and also you're at Notre Dame, just to kind of check in with what's going on campus and everything there. So, Steve, it's good to see you.
You too, Larry.
You look good.
So do you, but you look old, you know. I don't. You do. That's the way it works.
You said that when we got started, and I was like, you actually look the same. You're fairly timeless, and I do look. Yeah, I'm getting
The other
older.
day I was thinking about snow football.
Oh, that was so fun.
It was, yeah. We had snow here the other day, and today it's well into the 50s. And I was walking around thinking how great those days were.
Yeah, I remember,
You
just
know.
knocking on everybody's doors and asking people to see if they wanted to play, and we had a little group and going on around the first floor. I was like, well, should I ask Father Stephen? No, he doesn't want to play. And I just knocked on your door. I was like, hey, you want to play? And you're like, I'll be right out, And I think you came out wearing earmuffs or something on your.
Could be. Could be.
Yeah, you were a vicious fullback in the snow football game for sure.
Hard
That
to take down, right?
that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Um,
Right now, the campus is empty. I mean, you said talk about what's going on at Notre Dame. That'll
yeah,
take nothing. Uh, Teachers, of course, are teaching online, but many of them are doing it from home, their own homes. Uh, Others are sending out, packets of information and expecting people to send them papers.
hmm
The seminars, people are using Zoom a lot, and it seems to be going well.
yeah,
Uh, the Holy Cross community, we get together for meals and prayer every day, but we have opportunities and I guess you'd have to say privileges that most people in the world don't have right now in terms of being cared for, not worrying about where the next meal is going to come from, not having to worry about the grocery stores.
mm,
It I think it should make us both grateful and also re-examine some of the comforts that we have and are so used to
yeah,
as, as a religious community.
yeah. What did just for a second about Notre Dame, because I don't know. So colleges, schools, high school, everywhere across the country were kind of closed. Did
For
Notre
the rest
Dame?
of the semester,
So they just sent everybody home at spring break,
no,
I think it
no,
was, or
they did not invite them. They had told them to stay home after spring break. This all came up during spring break, which
yeah.
I think we should be grateful for because if it had not, everybody would have been here, and this is where they would have been isolated,
Oh,
and that would have been pretty bad.
yeah.
Uh,
That would have been everybody in a more close proximity to transmit this stuff.
and not going to classes, still having probably streamed classes, but you know what the college experience was like, so you
Yeah.
can imagine what the free time would have been like.
hmm
It's,
There would have been a lot of
don't
drinking.
cough. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know. You're not safe across the.
Uh, but yeah, so we're grateful for that, to tell you the truth. Students were communicating with them through Zoom and such, having group meetings and a lot of um, FaceTime and email stuff. I did as you know, homily on Sunday, and I will continue doing that, just so that both the St. Mary students, where I'm in campus ministry, and the students in the hall, the women's hall that I live in on campus here at Notre Dame, feel a liturgical connection to the place.
Yeah.
Really seem to appreciate that. I think the homily had 650 views or something like that.
Oh, that's great. Steve, what are you doing now at Notre Dame? You said you're
I'm campus minister at St. Mary's College,
okay.
is the women's college across the road, and without students, there's not a heck of a lot to do. So we're getting pretty creative with the online kind of ministry, and that's going well. Every day that we would have had mass, where somebody on the staff is doing a reflection on the readings of the day. Bible study is still going on. Praise and worship. I've been in touch with my student interns, and they want to get together and talk every so often. In the hall, we had just a chat session. There were about 10 students involved on Tuesday night when we would normally have had Mass and Flaherty, and that was fun. And people want to do that on a regular weekly basis. So we're learning, and we're being in touch. And I really feel badly, of course, for the seniors who kind of lost their senior year closure with all the activities that involves. What's going to happen with commencement is still up in the air. Time will tell. I don't know if
meaning they're even considering walking or having a big ceremony, maybe.
Yeah, if able, and certainly the students would want that. But I don't know. You know, the prognosticators are saying this will go well into May and June.
Yeah.
So I really, I don't know, but I feel badly for them.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of other things canceled, alumni reunions and ordination anniversaries, celebrations, and ordinations actually were supposed to be the Saturday after Easter traditionally. They've been postponed, so I feel sorry for those who were going to be ordained. But that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And people seem to be adapting well. There's terrible things we hear about nationally: the hoarding, the beating up on anybody who even remotely looks Asian. I think the president finally changed his description of the virus after much resistance. And
China virus,
yeah, I think he's calling it what it is. The stimulation package for your viewers just passed, and people will be getting some aid, right? And then also in terms of unemployment compensation. But also there's still some fat in there for one of the interesting
big money, big corporation.
One of the interesting that's emerged is, which do you value more, our capitalism or our lives? And we might think, well, that's pretty clear. No, it isn't. A lot of people are saying, let the older ones die for the sake of the capitalism. Our golden calf is money. Not ours, but I mean for many people. And they're willing to sacrifice human life so that the economy, the most important thing in their world, can be healthy.
I started seeing this a couple days ago where they used, at least this is social media stuff, is using pictures of older people they're making it look like the older person is saying, I'm willing to sacrifice myself for the economy. And wow, the doctor in me, that just rubbed me the wrong way. That I think it's reasonable to have an open discussion about the measures that we're doing and the costs that it has in terms of the burdens and the economic burdens on so many, and kind of, if we're going to do all this stuff, is it going to save one life? I think there is a discussion to have about that, but it just seemed so, I don't know what the word is.
Well, you're trained in medical ethics. I don't think the CEOs and such are trained in corporate or especially capitalism ethics. In fact, there doesn't seem to be much of an ethic in capitalism as a consideration. I'm not saying it's necessarily immoral, but it certainly is amoral. Nothing's going to be the same after this, Larry. Our financial system is going to be hurt very much, but also we're going to have to look at it in terms of redoing it. Everything's going to be different. Education's going to be different. Religion's going to be different. Spirituality will be different. Enforcement will be different. Crime and sentencing will be different. And that's the silver lining, I guess you'd say, in this very dark cloud. But for those who want to say, okay, now let's go back to the way things were, they'd be blowing an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to advance as a people and as a world in saying, because we are being thrown back to the basics, and almost a clean slate is coming our way, and we can say, okay, now, for example, some people say, why is God allowing this? And others are saying, that ain't the God of Jesus, that God doesn't send plagues. The Old Testament believed it that way, but the lie was put to that in the life, death, and resurrection of Christ, where we say God doesn't cause because of free will, but God is with us in it. That is, the only God of Jesus is the incarnate God, the spark of creation, the creator that is still alive within us through the Spirit. I'm waxing a little theological, but that divide between the fundamentalists and the more progressive theologians, for example, is practical right now, very practical, whereas perhaps in the past it was more theoretical. So there's that kind of stuff going on in every discipline.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I had for you. Did God send this coronavirus plague? Is
There,
this is this a is this of biblical proportions?
well, the answer to the second one is yes, but it has nothing to do with the first one.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is the God who would send plagues doesn't exist. I don't believe in God that way.
Yeah.
God is life. God is creative energy. God is the source of all being and the sustainer, and is within creation. We are not our own, and spiritual growth, for example, is connecting self, ego, with eternal life, with the life of the word we use as God. I've often said it would be great to put a 50-year moratorium on that word because it's been so generalized, so used, and so abused. Mm-hmm. But if we think of God as this external entity that is controlling and punishing and deciding, then that is not the God that I have learned to know through Jesus. That God is with us, and that's what the name Jesus means. God with us, Emmanuel. Everything that is free. Humans are the freest of all. A rock cannot be anything other than a rock, but we can be other than the combination of the human and divine that we truly are. And if we tap into that divine, we realize that, okay, reality exists objectively, and it is not controlled and it is not manipulated, except by us. You look at climate change, you look at pollution, and those kinds of things. That's human. That's not divine, certainly. But if we are in touch with the divine within us, and we realize that we are all of the same stuff, made of the same stuff. At the beginning of Lent, we say, "Remember, you are dust, and to dust you will return." Mm-hmm. And that's usually been thought of as, you used to be nothing, and you're going to be nothing. So don't get a big head. But another alternative way to understand that is, and the virus plays right into this. I'm not a scientist, so I can't go very deeply into it, but we are made, we always were, and we always will be. In other words, you are dust. You always were. And I don't mean you always were dust. I mean, you always existed. And you will return to dust. After death, we will return, but with an enlightened conscience, an awareness, and be in communion with all that is cosmically, all the dust in the world. We know that most of us, or I guess it says, we came from exploding stars, and that's the dust. But if you trace it back, there's no beginning. Now that blows our minds because we don't think that way. But that's where the God thing comes in. That life force, that energy, that sustaining being, that unconditionally accepting reality is with us, and our job is to become one with it. Not even in death. When the more we grow in communion with that, the more we enter eternal life right now. I'm working now on this Sunday's homily, which is the Gospel's the story of Lazarus. And I say, and I've always felt, poor Lazarus, he was raised from the dead only to die again. Why does he have to go through it twice? But I realize, in my own life, for example, how many deaths have I had?
Yeah.
Hopes, ambitions, emotions, and in at least two cases, almost physically.
Yeah.
And the most recent one was a 20-foot fall where I broke my neck and should have died and didn't. But my reaction as I was recovering from that was, it would have been okay if I did, because that's a transition. That's not an.
Yeah.
I didn't, and in case you were wondering, but had I, fine. And my sense is that the reason I didn't was because I have a lot more to learn, a lot more to grow in, a lot more awareness that needs to be affected. And since then, that was 4 years ago, that has been happening at a much more rapid pace than it ever had in my life prior to that.
Wow. You talk about Lazarus dying and you experiencing in your own life many deaths and loss.
We all do, yeah.
Yeah. How relevant now, in this time, from everything from students that are missing out on their senior year and graduation, and to there are going to be people that'll die from this thing. I mean, the whole spectrum of loss.
So in that sense, people are going to die anyway. And that might sound a little cynical, especially in terms of talking about what some of the capitalists are saying. But what is the quality of that death? And you run into that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So important. Not so that people feel good dying, as much as so that people understand it as a process, not as an end. That's the spiritual dynamic.
Tell me more about that. I mean, I imagine somebody that's watching this may have someone close that they do lose in Corona.
Well, we do realize that people die. One of the theologians that I grew up with here at Notre Dame as an undergraduate and graduate student was Father John Donne, who always posed the question, if I know that I must someday die, what can I do to satisfy my desire to live forever?
I had his class. I took a class from him before he died.
That would be a good time to do it. Yeah. Did you hear that question then before from him?
It was a whole semester of stuff like that. I don't remember that specific question, but I really liked that class and him.
Yeah, he was very creative and progressive in the healthiest sense of the word, theologian.
Yeah.
If I know that I'm going to die, and I do once I stop denying it or fighting it, and I want to live forever, how do I bring those two realities together? My glib answer is by entering into eternal life before I die, by taking on that cosmic sense of living forever, realizing that I'm in communion with all human beings. Today would have been my mother's 97th birthday, and she died 4 years ago. I miss her very much.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, it was going to happen. And again, the cynical part isn't there, but rather she is in the next phase of her existence. And in that sense, I can accept it rather than wondering, why did God allow this to happen? God did neither caused it nor could have prevented it. It's what happens. It's what reality is. But if we think about it as an end, then cynicism is very appropriate to say, well, then there's no purpose. Life's a bitch and then you die.
Yeah.
No, life's a process of living that includes death. If we take on that kind of a mentality and then grow into it, we have entered into an eternal consciousness, not a temporal consciousness. Everything is temporal in our world if we don't enter into that spiritual awakening, because a coronavirus then is a catastrophe. It's a crisis. I'm not denying that, but it's not a catastrophe. Somebody dying young is not a tragedy. It's a shame for us, but who are we to say that they would have been better off if they had lived? Because we don't know what eternal life is like, but we do, at least in faith, most faith traditions, believe that there's something to it.
I see what you're saying. The doctor in me still, especially the idea of a young person dying, it still responds and is wants to say no, those are the ones we really need to save. Like that's where, if we can and have an opportunity to intervene. And
but you don't, as a doctor, I mean, your oath is do no harm. You don't write off the elderly.
No, that's not what I mean. I don't mean we write off the elderly.
I'm not saying you do. I'm saying still have respect for human life and care. I mean, Jesus healed. He raised Lazarus from the dead. He could not have necessarily thought, well, Lazarus is dead, so what, big deal. He had a lot of empathy for the human condition because he was, and that's our job. But when I said temporal, I'm not so much talking about the comfort or the wellness of people or their health. I'm talking about the saying that, for example, the stock market is the arbiter of good or bad life. More important than anything else.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
The highest priority.
Right.
What's the most
highest priority?
What are your political priorities? What kind of a nation are you really?
Yeah. And that's what I think why it took so long to come up with a settlement on on whatever they just came up with today for the economic package, stimulus package.
Yeah.
Between what is the real priority, and is it the economy or is it the welfare of people? Now, I hope that what comes from those discussions is that the two are not seen as polar opposites. How do they come together? And people are afraid of that because the first word that comes to mind for many is communism, or less loaded socialism. And we've just been trained to not even want to look at that as anything but evil.
Yeah.
And for everything, we look at it and we say, what truth is there in it? Not is it true? Nothing possesses total truth. But what truth is there in it from which we can benefit and grow? Again, I don't know where things are going, but I do firmly believe that it's a great opportunity to re-examine. You might have heard me talk about my electromagnetic theory of spiritual growth, where when we're born, absolutely everything we experience clomps onto us, and then comes a crisis, like now, like illness, or we make the decision and we pull the plug, and everything falls out, and it's arrayed in front of us, and we look at it and we plug the plug back in, and we decide, what will I retain? What will I modify? What will I leave on the floor? That's when we start taking responsibility for our own lives, and that's something that should happen to people, certainly by their 30s.
You consciously choose
your life.
Yeah.
Who do I want to be? Who am I? What do I need to do in order to become it? Who should I be by my own understanding? And that changes. That always happens. There are, like I said, many deaths. But there's always a resurrection. That's the Paschal mystery.
So you think out of this can be an opportunity now in the middle of this corona stuff for people to do this kind of process, to grow, to...
Absolutely. They got the time. Netflix doesn't have to show up. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to get to know yourself. One of the things we do at St. Mary's, and would have been doing around this time, is what we call a busy person's retreat. Well, where you take a half hour daily in prayer and a half hour with a mentor, just reflecting, and in the midst of your busyness. And we're going to be doing that online with people one-to-one in a week or so.
You talked about, and your theology has always been God is one. God is with us. Where in the middle of this coronavirus crisis, where do you see God?
I see God in people, in creation, and what I see the virus as being is an opportunity for people to enter into the deepest places, the soul, and realize that they are in a partnership. We are not our own. We are created beings, created for communion with all that is. Sin is not living that way. It's not a checklist of behaviors. It's separation from the truth of who we are. Who we are is a combination of the human and the divine, God with us. And we are called to live that life of empathy, compassion, mercy, concern, forgiveness, charity, generosity, and not the life of greed and hoarding and narcissism and self-pity and all those things, because we really are not separate from each other. We are part of the same stuff. Dust to dust, ashes to ashes. That's a short answer. So when people go in their neighborhood and put boxes of care on the porches of elderly people who can't get out, when I read about a mother who is foregoing eating, not completely, but so that her kids have enough. That's God. That's the divine and the human working together within the individual. And when a church community, has a phone tree to see how everybody's doing, or a university or college community, when teachers are able to interface with their kids at home, and I've read so many stories about teachers having a different, a looser kind of more personal attitude through the web than they do in the classroom, many of them, because they're starting to realize that I need these kids and these kids need me in a way relational, not just an intellectual sense. All those kinds of things are manifestations or sacraments. The sacrament is a sign of the presence of God. Some of the mystics have said all is grace. These are graced opportunities, graced moments to grow in and live out the reality of who we are, the communion of the divine and the human, the created and the creator, kind of a Trinitarian sort of thing.
I like hearing and finding small inspirational things like that I think in this time there's so much of going on. It's hard to still not read, watch the news and read the headlines and feel this doomsday darkness all about, how do you balance that? How do you...
And I think it's really serendipitous that this all happened during the season of Lent.
Right.
Absolutely, because the point of Lent and the readings and so on are that God is not in darkness. Darkness is an absence of God. We infuse the light, just like Christ came to bring light into the darkness. And St. John says at one point, and the darkness just didn't grasp it. So we still have free will. We can still have that doomsday look. But if you retrain your spiritual eye and really believe that there is no resurrection, no victory in darkness, in death, then you read those headlines and say, okay, I hope those people are well. I hope their families are well. When somebody dies, who I don't necessarily know, but I know the family or whatever, I usually write and say, I mourn their loss with you, and I also celebrate with you their transition into new life. I think that second part is crucial. We don't just mourn, and we, in fact, find ways to do this. We celebrate their life, but what we need to add to that is celebrating their new life in communion and our own yearning for the same. Like in so many of the funeral liturgies, the gospel says, I've gone to prepare a place for you. So there is no darkness that is so dark that it overcomes life.
What if I'm going to ask a heretical question, but what if we just die?
Well,
What if there
I
is
understand what you're
nothing?
saying.
That idea, I think, is very comforting. My mother died 20 years ago, and it makes me feel better, But what if we just die?
What did you lose?
By believing or not believing it, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that wager called? Pascal's wager or something like
Yeah,
that.
right, right.
About, if you believe in it, you might as well believe in it, because then if you're wrong, you felt better,
Yeah,
and
you lived.
you're dead. You're dead too.
You lived better. The quality of your life was better. The quality of your citizenship was better. Your role in the community. I mean, if why bother if death is the end? Why bother with almost anything? Why be a doctor? Why be a spiritual counselor? Why be a engineer, astronaut? Well, we say for the subsequent generations, but yeah, there's really no loss in faith.
Yeah.
When my father died a few years before my mother did, she was very upset by the idea that until death do you part. She said, "Does that mean he doesn't care for me anymore?" And are we? Is he? What, it was almost like, what if he finds someone else in heaven? But I said to her, "Well, no. So that means your legal obligation is over with death. But in faith, yeah, you will be communed with with all that is. And if you're not, you won't care."
Do you remember? Have you? Does this feel like other times that you've lived through? Is there
Oh, well,
anything in your life that is
personally, sure, but
similar?
not globally. No, never. Uh, what would be the closest thing? 9/11, of course, has aspects of it, but no, nothing like this ever in the life of the church, in the life of the country, in the life of the education, the life of the economy. Never. Now, people who went through the Depression, if any of them are still alive, maybe a bit, because that was a number of years.
Yeah.
Certainly for the Jewish people and others who were interred, the Japanese Americans, for all those folks, yeah, that was complete loss. That's where Viktor Frankl, if you're familiar with him, he wrote the book
Man's
Man's
Search
Search
for
for Meaning.
Meaning. Great
Right.
book.
He said freedom is the ability to maintain your own identity in the midst of emptiness. That's not the exact quote. I forgot it now, but I used to use it a lot. Freedom is a choice, even in the most horrendous of all circumstances. And that's how he survived Auschwitz or whatever it was,
Mm-hmm.
by deciding, I can give into it and be under the cloud of doom, or I can have hope and search for meaning and even to some degree find it. And that's another example of opportunity in darkness.
In medicine, a lot of kind of my mentors have talked about HIV/AIDS in the '80s, where there was, a large population of largely gay men that was
Oh,
dying
for that
of
group, I'm sure it
gay
was.
cancer, and they didn't know what it took. It was years before it was diagnosed, and then a couple years before it was diagnosed, and then a couple more years before they even had a test for it, and then 11 years before you even had the first treatment for it.
Hmm.
And so the unknown and how scary that was, and
For the gay community, and there was no sense outside of that community that somehow it had something to do with us too. And this time, we can't play that game.
yeah, it's everybody.
Yeah, I'm not Jewish, I'm not gay, I'm not Japanese, I'm not whatever. Yeah, you are.
Maybe you could say I'm not old, I'm not sick.
Well, I can't say that so much anymore, Larry.
Maybe I can't either.
Yeah, I should really. Yeah. Right. We aren't excluded from any human dynamic or experience because we aren't our own. We're all of the same stuff.
How are we going to get through this thing if it lasts a long time? Weeks or
It's
months?
really going to upheave the entirety of our existence. Leadership is so important in this. So important.
What are you looking for leadership wise?
Well, somebody who knows what's going on, is honest about it, is transparent, and who gives guidance and is open to input from others. Uh, not Mario. Andrew
Cuomo.
is getting wonderful reviews for how he's handling it. I'm not that aware of how he's handling it, uh, but I hear good things. And then you contrast that with our national leadership. Uh, Not so much.
Yeah.
You know, very defensive, very self-centered, self-absorbed. It's all about him, and uh, that doesn't help. Right now, we are at a point of surpassing China in being affected by the virus. I don't mean numbers, of course; they have many more,
Yeah.
but incidents per whatever the population.
Yeah.
That wasn't necessary. You look at South Korea, uh, very different situation. They were prepared. We could have been prepared, but we weren't. That comes down to leadership to get us through. And I'm not talking about um, a dictator or a god making us all, walk in lockstep. I'm talking about the emotional and the physical, allowing those things to the experts to come together and have free reign, basically.
Yeah.
That's the only way we're going to get through it. And at the risk of sounding political, because I don't think it is. I think it's not a political question. It's a moral question. The more we have the kind of leadership we have at the national level, the worse it's going to get. I mean, it must break your heart to watch any of those daily press conferences with Dr.
Fauci.
Andrew Fauci standing in the background and having to clean up afterwards. I mean, who's the medical expert there? Well, and who thinks he is? Let's be honest, if we can,
Yeah.
and if we can't, let's get honest people in there.
He's muzzled to a large extent, and you wonder. It just makes me wonder what has he been advising, and what have we been actually doing? Of whatever options were available to us at each stage in this thing.
Yeah, it does seem that he's doing some good stuff behind the scenes, but again, nothing's transparent, so who knows?
You mentioned for a moment about how this could be an opportunity in all kinds of ways, education, religion, to, I don't remember the words you used, rebuild or start over or kind of grow and take the next step. What are ways for, what's the opportunity for religion and spirituality?
To come to a clear distinction between the essentials and the accidentals. Accidentals in the philosophical sense of the word, not mistakes. What's really, really, really important. And I think this comes to a head in so many of the churches closing and not having their services. And that is truer no more anywhere than in the Catholic Church. I could not, I've never, ever, ever heard the church shut down for a weekend, much less for a long time, because the Eucharist is the center of our lives. What we're doing now, what the opportunity there is to understand, what do we mean by the Eucharist? Is it about bread and wine being magically changed? Or is it about the most common of elements, which at the dinner table for Jesus was bread and wine, being consecrated, being made holy, being viewed as holy? And the sacrifice is not a negative, but a making holy. Sacrificium means to make holy. And bringing to consciousness the holiness of all that is. This starvation from the literal Eucharist is an opportunity to see, as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin did, the holiness of a rock, the holiness of a sunset or a sunrise, the holiness of the mountains, and to not separate those things from the holiness of the human in relationship with the divine, which is what the Eucharist is. Giving thanks for that communion that Jesus gave us, awareness of that the human and the divine are one. Not just in him, but in all. So it advances that way of thinking. Now, there are many people who say that the churches never should have closed because, and this would be a sense of God that I don't share, because God wants us to be in church. Again, Jesus has said over and over and over again that God doesn't exist. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. If you're hungry and you're walking through a wheat field and it's the Sabbath, eat the grain. It's always been there, but we haven't always seen it. And this is an opportunity for preachers and ministers and pastoral people to kind of reinforce that in people and say, no, we're not just talking about it. We really, really mean it as true. It's not just a way of talking. It's not a metaphor. It's the reality.
What are some... Keep going. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you're contrasting kind of what's important with what's not important. What's
not that important?
What's less important? What isn't?
Well, obviously, the law of the church is less important than the law of love. I mean, they are not equal. We're seeing that by virtue of not having the Eucharist as part of our making holy the Sabbath. Human interaction and help is much more important than personal piety, pro forma, saying words. I'm not saying meditation and all that, but I'm saying that notion of prayer as delusion, not delusion, storming heaven with words. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the, Thomas Aquinas used to say, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? So much of what is being talked about as important. It's just angels on the head of a pin. There's nothing to do. It's a way to quantify, but it's not a way to experience or to love. I'm not putting down the intellect, but I'm saying that action. St. James says in his epistles, uh, say you have faith and show me your action, because faith without works is dead. So we're redefining what is faith. Faith is living in communion. Faith is believing that we are one. It's not believing in angels and the particulars of the stories of especially the Old Testament, but also the New. That's not faith. Do you believe in hell? Well, of course I do, because God said there's hell. When did God say that? Well, it didn't really, but I've always been taught it. Is belief in hell essential for my hell, as I learned it, essential for my spirituality? No, emptiness is, and Sartre said, of course, hell is other people. The absence of love is hell, but a place where fire is consuming and quenching, and I don't have to believe that to be spiritual. I don't have to believe that to be Catholic. What I have to believe in is the risen Christ. That is conquering death for all time. And that didn't happen linearly. I think it was more a revealing of eternal truths than it was making them.
It's good stuff, Father Steve.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about it.
Yeah, I'm glad we could do this. Show everybody your Soren College.
Oh, there's not a this one. Oh, there it is.
There we go.
Soren College, for those who you don't know, is one of the dormitories at Notre Dame that seceded from the university symbolically during the Vietnam War in opposition to the war. And it's retained the college name ever since. It's kind of, for some, it's kind of an elitist thing, but I think for others, it's a reminder that we are prophets.
I think most would acknowledge we were one of, if not probably the best male dorm on campus. Anyway.
But we have to realize that, if we're honest, that a lot of that had to do with size. We know each other. Many don't. Larry was president of the dorm.
There was only one other dorm that was smaller than us, right? St. Ed's was a little smaller.
No, the one across the lake is, what is that called? Holy Cross? No.
Carroll.
Carroll.
I thought Carroll was bigger than Soren, but those sweatshirts came from our administration. I'm proud that it has lived 20 years later. I should have worn mine. Maybe I'll dig it up, and I think I've got it out here in California. So maybe we can do this again, and I'll wear mine next time.
All right. Thanks, Larry.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for doing this, Father Steve.
Thanks for asking me.
And I appreciate your thoughts and ideas and encouragement in this time. I think it's good to hear. It's helpful.
Be interesting to hear any feedback that you get on. Please share that with me, even if it's bad.
If with your permission, I would post this on Facebook and tag you, so you'll get the feedback yourself. But
okay, fine.
There were roommates of mine that heard I had mentioned I was going to interview you. They were looking forward to hearing what you had to say. So,
great!
I know there will be an audience, at least of Soren guys, that would love to hear your thoughts on this. So I know that they'll appreciate it, and I'm sure many more will as well. So,
thank you very much. It'd be good to reestablish communication, especially if I don't get to see many of them during the football season if it's canceled.
Yeah, God, I wonder if football's going to happen or not. I don't know.
There's no practice going on except at home.
The Notre Dame football team's not even practicing. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So those student athletes are all gone too.
Everybody's gone. Yeah.
Oh, wow, I didn't even think about that. No spring game, all that. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna wrap this thing up.
Thank you.